So in my previous video, I was looking at a Gnostic myth, creation myth from the Apocryphon of John, from the Nag Hammadi library discovery in 1945. And today I want to go a step further in this discussion on the Gnostic text by thinking about Gnosticism and asking the question, can we extract out from these Gnostic texts a philosophy that we can see in the world around us even to this day, or is that impossible to do that? So, a couple of things to say at the beginning of this video is that some scholars do not think that we can do that. So, Williams has a book, Rethinking Gnosticism, an argument for dismantling a dubious category. So, that's one argument that no, this is not a helpful category and we shouldn't do that. And then you've got people like Nicola Lewis that says this: most of us agree Gnosticism is a philosophy, a way of thinking about the world, but here's where it gets complicated. The term Gnosticism is also used to describe an ancient movement or school, but as far as we know it, was never known by the term Gnosticism. So I think what a lot of people are getting to here is that when we say Gnosticism and we apply it to this group of sects in the second century who were writing or producing some of these Gnostic texts, that a lot of which were discovered in the Nag Hammadi library, it's very difficult to group all of those beliefs together under one coherent thing called Gnosticism. However, a lot of people do recognize that there are some philosophical points that we can take out from all of these texts that they do all agree on, and we can say, yeah, this is a rough framework called Gnosticism. So the word Gnosticism it's different from gnosis, which is the Greek word for knowledge, and Gnostic, so the Gnostic texts. But it's obviously based on those words. It was coined by Henry More in the 1600s, and he invented the term Gnosticism for all the heresies that Irenaeus and his heresiological successors attacked. So Irenaeus of Lyon, I've got his book, over behind me, Against Heresies, and he was speaking against some of the Gnostic sects and philosophies that were very popular in his day, in defense as an apologist for the Christian way of understanding and seeing the world. And so Gnosticism was originally invented, because remember, this is before the Nag Hammadi library was discovered in the 40s. And so it was invented as a term for describing the philosophy that Irenaeus and his later successors were attacking there. So let me just do one more quote from Nicola Lewis here, which I think does help to bring out the idea of Gnosticism being a thought pattern that we can identify. In this sense, Gnosticism, the idea that gnosis is a necessary form of awakening from a perpetual sleep, is also a philosophy that transcends place and time. There can be ancient Gnosticism and modern Gnosticism, or Christian Gnosticism and non-Christian Gnosticism. Those who possess gnosis recognize that they are not of this world, but are of that other one, the existence of which remains invisible and imperceptible to the rest of us trapped in ignorance. So although I understand that many scholars are wary of drawing out a kind of one-size-fits-all philosophy from these different texts that are very different in the way that they read and such, these Gnostic texts, there is this sense of awakening, waking up from a perpetual sleep to see what's really going on, and then being one who possesses gnosis and is able to see what is invisible or secret or imperceptible to those who are still trapped in ignorance. So there's always this othering that happens when you are involved in gaining knowledge via gnosis. And this is why I think it's important, and that actually we can recognize this philosophy in popular culture. So in recent years, not only did scholarship happen after the Nag Hammadi library discovery, but some pseudo-scholarship also happened, let's put it that way. And from that, there have also been movies and books and pieces of art that have been produced, and even offshoots of modern Gnostic sects from these writings that were discovered. So, for example, a famous movie example of a Gnostic ideology embedded in a story would be The Matrix.
It is the world that has been pulled over your eyes to blind you from the truth.
What truth?
That you are a slave, Neo. Like everyone else, you were born into bondage, born into a prison that you cannot smell or taste or touch. A prison for your mind.
You're part of this system, but you don't realize you're part of it. And then someone realizes what they are part of, and that the everyday life that they experience of, I guess, the rat race is actually something that there is a greater reality, that if they take this pill, they can actually awaken and realize what is really going on. And the goal within that story of the good thing to do is to be liberated from that system. And then we also have the novel by Dan Brown, The Da Vinci Code, which takes even themes that the Gnostic Gospels suggest of Jesus being married to Mary Magdalene, and there being this secret history of a lineage that can be uncovered or unveiled to those who are in the know. Again, this is a very Gnostic way of seeing things. And then to zoom out a bit further, and I don't want to become kind of conspiratorial with this, and that's not my goal of this. I'm more trying to recognize a theme that is just a reality of human experience. The biggest company in the world's logo seems to be celebrating the Gnostic way of understanding the creation myth, which is it was a good thing that we ate of the fruit for ourselves, so we can go and develop and build all of these amazing products, as opposed to the Genesis account, which mourned the fact that we ate of the fruit outside of God's plan for us, which was through relationship with Him. And so I think that Gnosticism is not useful as a weapon to hammer people with, but it is helpful as a mirror to hold up the world in which we live too. I think there's a sense in which if our way of knowing is broken, as my Genesis video concluded, then we should expect something like Gnosticism to exist. So I think if you have a Christian worldview, it shouldn't surprise you that we fall into this way of seeing things very easily and often. But also it's important to say that it's not the only way of seeing the world that we fall into. It's not that it's either Christianity or Gnosticism, and that's the only thing. I think Gnosticism is more like a tendency than a worldview that you hold, unless you literally become a Gnostic and you let it inform everything about the way you see things. That isn't how most people interact with the world. The reason Gnosticism is helpful is, one, because of the creation myth that I laid out in my last video, but also because of tendencies that we as humans whose way of knowing is broken often fall into. And the question is then, what can cut against that? And this is where Christian worship comes in. And James K. Smith says that Christian worship is not the sort of thing that ethereal disembodied spirits could engage in. And, the goal of Gnosticism is to transcend this inherently evil world and our evil physical bodies to attain a kind of spiritual awakening, because our ultimate destination is a spiritual one. And you can see where Christian Gnosticism might exist that makes the mistake of thinking our home is a spiritual existence in heaven, rather than a new creation of a new heavens and a new earth, that the earthly things of this world also do matter to God, and this world isn't just going to be blown up and totally destroyed. I think that's a misreading of the passage in Peter. It's actually going to be remade and restored to what God always intended. James K. Smith goes on to say, the very performance of Christian worship cuts against both dualistic Gnosticism, which would construe matter and bodies as inherently evil, and reductionistic naturalism, which would construe the world as merely natural. The sacramental imagination runs counter to both of these reductionistic understandings of the world. And then he also says, before Christians had systematic theology and worldviews, They were singing hymns and psalms, saying prayers, celebrating the Eucharist, sharing their property, and becoming a people marked by a desire for God's coming kingdom, a desire that constituted them as a peculiar people in the present. So this idea of the sacramental imagination that Smith uses there is, well, a sacrament is a means of grace. It's a way in which we as human beings can receive. Notice the trajectory of the knowledge there. It's not knowledge by taking, it's knowledge by receiving. And so one of the reasons Christians gather for worship every week is to receive a means of the grace of the creator of this universe. And let's take an example of the Eucharist to end this video. The Eucharist, the bread and the wine, is the coming together of a God-given natural resource of a vine or wheat with human ingenuity and craft that is made into bread and wine. And when we receive that coming together of humans as the image of God with the Maker, we receive a physical thing into our physical bodies that speaks of a spiritual reality, which is of the God-man, Jesus, who was truly man and truly God, who in his own body died a real death, but then had a spiritual and a physical resurrection. And the resurrection body was where the spiritual and the physical were not dichotomized anymore. They came together in one. And so he still had marks on his actual hands that Thomas could touch if he wanted to. He made breakfast, by the lake. But he also could walk through locked doors. So there's this reality that we receive into ourselves in our current physical and dying bodies that reminds us of a greater spiritual reality. And it's a way in which God's grace meets with us in the present. And so I think that a sacramental imagination is one that sees both the inherent goodness of the created world in which we live and accepts the brokenness that is part of that reality, but points to something greater beyond ourselves, which we can only fully understand and gain by opening our hands like this and receiving that knowledge.